The, the other point I wanted to make to you is that states don't run very many things. Most of state budgets are pass-throughs to local governments. And local governments are legal creatures of states. So, I don't want to bore you, but there are counties in this state that are being downgraded, whose credit rating is being downgraded. As we sit here this morning, some are in very severe financial shape. Suffolk County had a newly elected county exec, a terrific, bright, young, honorable guy, came into office, found out that on a $2 billion budget, he was facing a $500 million deficit, and that's sort of hard to overcome in 1 year. The cities of Rochester, Syracuse, every upstate city is in serious trouble. They are using one-shots. They're getting advance payments from the state against next year's city aid payments. They're borrowing money from the state pension fund to make the contributions that they are obligated to make to the pension fund to provide benefits for their own employees. This is also not sustainable. And where you see the problems getting more and more acute is at the city level, and the town level, the local level. There are 17 million, or roughly 17 million people who work for state and local governments throughout the United States. And so far, since 2008, about 800,000 have lost their jobs. And I will tell you the expectation is that a lot more are going to lose their jobs in the next few years, whether through attrition, through firings, etc. The mayor of the city of New York, we haven't seen the final budget yet for this year, but we know in order to avoid more teacher layoffs that the city, for the first time, started using one-shots. They sold, they included in their budget $1 billion from the sale of more taxi medallions. Well, I don't know whether that's realistic or not, but I know if they sell $1 billion worth of taxi medallions this year, it's not going to be a revenue that's going to repeat itself next year. And they used a reserve that the city had been setting aside to help pay for the healthcare liabilities that they have for their employees. And they are proposing to defer the payment of their pension contribution. Instead of paying it in 1 year, which they should, they're going to pay it over 20 years. I'm not trying to be judgmental about these things. I'm saying to you is that we're responsible. Our political system has preferred to kick the can down the road than recognize the fact, very simple fact, that our society has made commitments that we cannot afford. And it's no more complicated than that. It's true, obviously, of Western Europe as well. And we've increased benefits, lowered eligibility age for all kinds of benefits. Politically, it's toxic to suggest that maybe raising the age of eligibility for Medicare or Social Security, which would save an immense amount of money, but that's a political no-no. And raising taxes is considered to be political death. So, therefore, what do I think the answer is? The answer is, first of all, people have to understand that we're in deep trouble. And whether they're going to understand it because there are more and more stories, like the lead story in the New York Times this morning, that states are using money It was supposed to help people whose homes were foreclosed. They're using that to balance budgets. I mean, I could stand here for hours and tell you stories. I was in California 2 weeks ago, had lunch with the mayor of San Jose, California. Very bright, terrific guy, not running for re-election, very able, lawyer, Democrat, all the right instincts, 10th largest city in the United States, center of Silicon Valley. He's laid off about 20% of all the municipal employees and has a referendum on the ballot this June to modify the pension system there, without which the city could face the possibility of having to go bankrupt. Stockton, California has already gone bankrupt. Vallejo has gone bankrupt. Cities in Rhode Island have gone bankrupt. Nassau County is under the jurisdiction of a control board. The press isn't connecting the dots on this issue either. And therefore,
why is that?
That's a good question. I spend a lot of time trying to get them to do it. But they don't. It's not interesting. And pension stories are covered by business reporters. The conservative press thinks the problem is all with the benefits for public employees. And the unions, quite understandably, say the whole problem is a revenue insufficiency problem. And here's my conclusion, that until the President and the Congress of the United States recognize this problem, and I don't mean for the purpose of writing checks primarily, but of forcing the governors and the unions and the banks and the mayors to come to some kind of compromise to stop this process that is so threatening to the stability, social stability as well as fiscal stability. Just tell you a marvelous thing, the mayor of Rochester testified at a budget hearing in Albany a month or so ago. Well, tell you, New York Times had a story one day about how, despite the bankruptcy of Eastman Kodak, the flowers were blooming in Rochester. And a day later, the mayor of Rochester testified to the New York State Legislature that they were in critical financial condition. And he made an eloquent speech in which he said that cultural and social bankruptcy precedes financial bankruptcy. New York Times never covered that testimony. So, unless the people who are involved in politics, and I'm talking about the citizens, force the people who run for office to say, you've got to address this problem. There isn't going to be agreement as to how much more taxes or how you stretch out retirement obligations. And as I said, in my view, just as what happened in the 70s when New York avoided bankruptcy, it avoided bankruptcy because everybody puts something on the table. The unions, the banks, taxes, more taxes. Everybody did the very thing they said they would never do because the alternative was so much worse. Well, we're rapidly approaching the point, in my judgment, where that's got to happen. And I can only say I hope whoever's elected president recognizes that this problem has to be addressed in its broadest sense. Anyway, I've talked longer, I suspect, than you'd like it. I'd be delighted to answer questions. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry I don't know names, but.
Okay. In my opinion, the biggest problem this country faces is income inequality, where the last many years, 93% of all the increases in wealth and asset and income have gone to the top 1%. Therefore, don't you think we should be increasing income, capital gains, estate, and Social Security taxes on the wealthy and corporations? And if they were paying their fair share of taxes, which they are not, a lot of our economic problems would disappear overnight. And I'm quoting Nobel Prize winner Paul Krugman.
Well, let me say, I don't always agree with Paul Krugman, but I certainly fully agree with your basic proposition that the distribution of wealth in this country is going to be already is a serious problem from an equity point of view and from a revenue collection point of view. But I have to remind you that even if you double the rate on income tax on the very rich, that's not enough money to solve all our problem. 50% of the people in the United States do not pay any income tax at all, our whole system. And there are a lot of rich people who don't pay any because of loopholes. So we need a whole new examination of how we collect taxes. And yes, I share your view, which is, that people have a different view, and that's part of what has to be bargained out. But I personally agree with you.
How's it going to be done?
Yes,
Wait a minute,
ma'am.
well, let's raise hands.
Yeah.
Sure.
I had a question. I wanted to go back to the issue of Medicaid and the cutting of Medicaid and how that would impact those who can't afford medical attention, good medical attention. It just seems to me that nobody brings out the point that the Hippocratic oath of doctors is to heal, whether you've got a card, whether you've got money or whatever. So these people who may be losing Medicaid will still be going to hospitals, and
Yes.
somebody's going to be paying for that.
Yes,
And
we
I-
are.
Yes, and I don't understand why there's not more emphasis placed on the reality of that aspect, that if you cut this, you're
Well,
still
that's,
paying.
that's part of, again, this is a vast and complicated subject, but it is part of the debate about the Obama healthcare bill, because the intention was to require everyone to have insurance so that the people who now get their primary health care by going to the emergency rooms of hospitals, where it is either the health care is inadequate or it's funded only indirectly by the public, that's a real issue. But it doesn't say how much insurance or what's covered and what's deductible, etc. And there are a lot of people, myself included, who believe that the only way you can ever bend the healthcare cost curve in this country is if you have a single payer system. And the president chose not to push for that, I think in fairness, because he was advised that it had no chance of getting any Republican votes. But they didn't get any Republican votes for what they got either, so who knows.
David?